My coworker and friend waited until I was asleep to get intimate with my emotionally vulnerable younger brother after I explicitly warned them both, and now I'm left feeling betrayed, undermined, and questioning whether protecting my brother makes me controlling. I'm a 24-year-old gay man, and about 8 months ago, I started working at a new job after moving back to my hometown with my younger brother, Kato, 21, also gay. We moved back a couple of years after our dad passed away, which was already a difficult and emotionally heavy transition on its own. Coming back here meant returning to a place full of memories, routines, and people I thought I had mostly outgrown. Starting over professionally felt like a way to anchor myself again, even if everything else still felt unsettled. Through this job, I ended up running into a mix of new faces and people I hadn't seen in years. One of those familiar faces was Finn, a guy I vaguely knew from high school. He's straight, 27 now, and we were never close back then. We had a couple of classes together, but we never hung out or spoke outside of school. He graduated 2 years before I did, so even then there was a bit of distance. Seeing him again was unexpected, but not unwelcome. Now that we're coworkers, Finn and I have actually gotten to know each other quite a bit more. We talk regularly at work, joke around, complain about shifts, and bond over shared hobbies and interests. We'll sometimes give each other rides if one of us needs it, and occasionally we'll hang around after work just shooting the shit before heading home. One reason for that is that we don't really hang out outside of work. Part of it is timing and schedules, sure, but a bigger part is that I haven't fully vetted him yet. I'm cautious by nature, especially after everything I've been through the last few years. Another big factor is his history with alcohol. When I first started working there, Finn was very close to getting fired because of it. He had shown up hungover more than once, and there were even times he came in clearly intoxicated. It affected his reliability and reputation at work, and it was something everyone knew about. That kind of behavior is a huge red flag for me, not because I think he's a bad person, but because I'm very careful about who I surround myself with. Since then, he claims he's mostly sober. From what he's told me, he'll only have a drink or two on special occasions now. And to his credit, his performance at work has improved a lot. He shows up on time, seems clear-headed, and hasn't had any incidents that I've seen. I want to be clear that I don't have any moral issue with people who struggle with alcohol dependency. I know firsthand how difficult it is to quit, or even just cut back. Alcohol abuse runs deep in my family, generations deep. It's practically a legacy at this point, and it's one I desperately don't want to continue. My dad ultimately passed away because of it, and that loss still hangs over me and my brother in ways I don't think we fully understand yet. Kato and I both drink. I won't pretend we don't. I wouldn't call either of us chronic or dependent drinkers, but I also wouldn't say our relationship with alcohol is healthy. It's more of a gray area, something that hasn't completely spiraled, but absolutely could if we're not careful. There have been plenty of times where drinking has lowered our inhibitions and led to choices that probably would have been better thought out if we were sober. Cut to the beginning of this month. Up until then, Finn and I had never really made the effort to hang out outside of work. It wasn't for lack of friendliness, but more a combination of caution, schedules, and the unspoken understanding that some work friendships stay in that lane. Still, with the holiday season approaching, our company Christmas party was right around the corner, and it felt like a natural exception. A few of us decided to carpool together, for people total, all between the ages of 24 and 27, so no one would have to worry about driving or logistics. The night of the party itself went surprisingly smoothly. Finn made a point to stay mostly sober, something I noticed right away and quietly appreciated. Over the 4-hour function, he only had about 3 drinks. We mingled with coworkers, talked to people we don't usually interact with, laughed, and bounced around the room as the night went on. The overall vibe was relaxed and festive, and for once, I didn't feel like I was on edge or overanalyzing everything. At some point, the question of what next came up and someone suggested going back to my place. The idea was simple and low-key. A nightcap, a few more drinks, maybe some card games, nothing too crazy. When we got back to my place, there were a few introductions that needed to happen. Finn already knew the 2 other friends who came with us, but this was his first real interaction with my brother, Kato. We grabbed drinks, got comfortable, and almost immediately Kato, who was already noticeably under the influence, started flirting with Finn. That didn't surprise me in the slightest. Kato has always had a habit of flirting with my objectively attractive friends, especially after he's had a few drinks. It's something I've seen countless times over the years. What also didn't surprise me was that Finn flirted back. To be fair, that kind of banter is pretty normal in our environment. We work in a kitchen, and anyone who's spent time in that kind of space understands how casual, flirtatious, and joking the dynamic can be, especially among guys. So, at first, it didn't register as anything out of the ordinary. We kept drinking, talking, laughing, and listening to music. The flirting continued in the background, but it felt mutual and lighthearted rather than serious or concerning. As the night went on, everyone started to settle down. We claimed our sleeping spots, my bed, the couch, and the floor. We live in a double wide, so we made do with the space we had. Finn ended up sleeping on the floor next to me, while the other two friends were nearby. By that point, most of us were drunk enough that sleep came easily. Everyone except Kato, that is. He was clearly more inebriated than the rest of us, and still had plenty of energy. He didn't seem to notice that the rest of us were fading, so he kept trying to flirt with and cuddle Finn. Finn didn't exactly shut it down, but it also didn't escalate into anything explicit. It felt like lingering closeness, quiet conversation, and the kind of half-awake intimacy that happens when alcohol lowers everyone's inhibitions. Eventually, I passed out. Later that morning, I found out that after I fell asleep, the two of them stayed up for a while longer doing much of the same, talking, flirting, cuddling. At some point, they exchanged phone numbers. Eventually, Kato went to bed. A few hours later, I woke up needing to pee. Still groggy and half asleep, I walked down the hall and instinctively checked on Kato, something I've always done without thinking. When I opened his door, I saw him and Finn cuddling in his bed. I stood there for a moment, surprised and trying to process what I was seeing. It wasn't dramatic or overtly intimate, but it was definitely intimate. I quietly closed the door and went back to bed. It was early, everyone was still asleep, and I didn't feel like that moment was the right time to react or confront anyone. Still, as I lay there afterward, my mind started racing, replaying the night and wondering what this meant, if anything, and how it might complicate things moving forward. I say instinctively because that habit didn't come out of nowhere. Before my dad passed away, my mom had already left our family about 8 years earlier. I was around 15 or 16 at the time, and as the oldest, I ended up taking on most of the responsibilities she left behind. I became the default parent in a lot of ways, cleaning the house, cooking meals, doing laundry, waking my brothers up for school, getting them to and from practices and activities, making sure homework got done. I grew up fast because I didn't really have a choice. After my dad passed, that role didn't disappear. If anything, it became more ingrained. As the eldest son, I felt it was my responsibility to take care of my brothers, especially Kato. So checking on him at night, making sure he's okay, or just instinctively wanting to know where everyone is, that's second nature to me at this point. It's not about control, it's about habit and concern that's been wired into me for nearly a decade. That aside, the morning after I saw Kato and Finn cuddling, I decided not to make a big deal out of it. I chalked it up to drunken night shenanigans, the kind of thing that happens when people drink too much and boundaries get a little fuzzy. When everyone was awake, I gave both of them a hard time about it in a joking way, and my other friends did too. It felt easier to keep it light rather than immediately assign meaning to something that might not have any. Still, before the next time we all hung out, I had some more serious conversations with both of them separately. With Kato, I told him to be careful. As far as I knew, Finn was straight. He was also lonely, something Finn and I had talked about more than once during late-night heart-to-hearts at work. I didn't want Kato getting attached to someone who might not be emotionally or romantically available in the way he'd hope. With Finn, I had a different conversation. I explained that Kato had just come out of a really complicated and painful relationship with his ex. They'd broken up and gotten back together multiple times. Kato had been lied to about his ex's sobriety, financially taken advantage of, and emotionally and physically hurt. The breakup was recent, only a couple of months earlier, and Kato was still very much healing. I wanted Finn to understand that this wasn't just harmless flirting on Kato's end. There was real vulnerability there. With all of that in mind, I still decided to let Finn come over one more time a few days later. I told myself it was to test the waters, to see if the first night really had been a fluke brought on by alcohol and the party atmosphere. Finn came over with drinks, we played card games, and let the night unfold naturally. Kato joined us for a bit early on, but this time the flirting was minimal. Honestly, that felt like a good sign to me, a calmer, more respectful dynamic. As the night went on, I drank more than I probably should have, and eventually we all agreed it was time to sleep. I fell asleep before either of them did. When I woke up later, something immediately felt off. Finn wasn't on the couch next to me where he'd been sleeping earlier. I got up to use the restroom and, almost without thinking, checked on Kato. Once again, I found them asleep next to each other in Kato's bed. I just stood there for a moment, staring, trying to process what I was seeing. I felt surprised all over again, but this time there was something else layered on top of it: confusion, frustration, and a creeping sense of being undermined. It felt like the conversations I'd had with both of them hadn't mattered, or at least hadn't been taken seriously. Quietly, I closed the door and went back to bed, but I didn't sleep well after that. I was shocked, a bit upset, and left wondering why this kept happening despite my attempts to be honest, cautious, and protective of everyone involved. Since then, I still haven't talked to Finn about any of this. I think part of me has been avoiding it because I don't even know how to start that conversation without it turning uncomfortable or defensive. I have talked to Kato, though. I needed to understand what was actually going on from his perspective, because from where I was standing, the situation felt increasingly messy and unsettling. When I asked Kato what was going on between him and Finn, his answer was frustratingly vague. He told me it was really nothing, that he didn't even fully know what it was himself. He said he wasn't looking for a relationship and didn't have any expectations. At the same time, he admitted that he was enjoying the attention. That alone set off alarm bells for me. I know my brother, and I know how vulnerable he still is after his last relationship. Enjoying attention when you're still healing can blur into emotional dependence very quickly, even if you don't mean for it to. I tried to approach the rest of the conversation gently. I didn't want to lecture him, or sound like I was controlling his choices. I pointed out some of the similarities I was seeing between his ex and Finn, not in personality, but in the dynamic. The emotional availability, the uncertainty, the mixed signals, the way Kato was once again putting himself in a position where he might be hoping for something from someone who may not actually be capable of giving it. I told him I was worried he could end up falling into the same hole he just barely crawled out of. I also admitted something I'd been sitting with since the second night. I told him I couldn't shake the feeling that they had waited until I fell asleep to be together. That part bothered me more than I wanted to admit, because it felt intentional. When I said that, Kato didn't sugarcoat it or dance around the truth. He told me very directly that Finn was the one who specifically waited until I was asleep. Hearing that made my stomach drop. Since that conversation, I've been stuck in my head. I keep going back and forth, trying to make sense of it all. Maybe it really was just the circumstances: alcohol, lowered inhibitions, two people who are both objectively vulnerable in their own ways. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. But at the same time, I can't ignore how uncomfortable it makes me feel that my friend intentionally waited for me to be unconscious before messing around with my brother. There's also the bigger question I can't stop circling. If Finn is curious about men, what does that mean for Kato? If he is into guys, where does that leave my brother emotionally? And if he isn't, then what exactly is Kato to him? An experiment? A safe place to test something without consequences? I don't want to gatekeep someone's self-discovery or make them feel ashamed for questioning their sexuality. But I also don't want my brother to be collateral damage in that process. I feel torn between wanting to respect everyone's autonomy and wanting to protect my brother from getting hurt again. And on a more personal level, I don't like the idea that my boundaries as a friend were quietly stepped around instead of addressed. Waiting until I was asleep feels sneaky, and that alone makes me question Finn's intentions. So now I'm left wondering if I'd be the a-hole for finally telling Finn why I don't feel comfortable with him being around us right now. I don't want to overstep or control anyone's choices, but I also don't want to stay silent and regret it later if someone ends up getting hurt.